all started 53 big smelly years ago, back when I was a big smelly, fully grown little boy. One big smelly day, while I was jumping through the big smelly street, I happened upon a large big smelly vehicle, which clobbered me violently into a nearby window. After getting my big smelly bearings, I looked up to see a young big smelly boy with a big smelly Game Boy Advanced SP Blue Edition in his tiny little big smelly hands. I had always dreamed of owning a big smelly Game Boy Advanced SP Blue Edition, but my big smelly family could barely even afford big smelly gold. He looked up at me with those big vibrating big smelly eyes. His two lower big smelly teeth quivered in confusion. "Mama," he said softly. This was my big smelly chance. I ran at him, stomping my feet, scrambling his brain in sheer confusion. I shoved him in and I ran out the big smelly door. I leaped back down the big smelly street towards my big smelly home. I pulled open the door by its handle and I let myself in quietly. I snuck past my many big smelly parents and shut myself into my big smelly room. I had made it. Finally, a big smelly Game Boy Advanced SP to call my own. I will have to keep it hidden from my big smelly family. I shan't ever allow them to know. I took the big smelly Game Boy SP in my small, beautiful, big smelly hands and proceeded to slide the big smelly switch to on mode. I will never forget that wonderful big smelly sound it made the first time I turned it on. And that wonderful big smelly Nintendo logo splashed my big smelly screen in sheer delight. I blew out my big smelly candle and I pulled my big smelly curtain shut tight. Suddenly, a small big smelly man appeared on screen. Shortly after, the big smelly word Mario started flashing behind him. I assume this big smelly man is the big smelly man known as Mario. I had seen big smelly adverts showing him on television. The big smelly title of the game slowly lowered itself in from the big smelly top of the screen. Super Mario. And the big smelly legend of the big smelly stolen Game Boy Advanced SP Blue Edition. My big smelly heart sank as I noticed the big smelly dead pixel in the big smelly lower left region of the big smelly screen. Big smelly beggars can't be big smelly choosers, I thought to myself, however. And I pressed the big smelly start button with my big smelly of big smelly vast landscape with big smelly clouds, big smelly bushes and big smelly bricks appeared before my very big smelly eye. And there he was, the familiar big smelly Mario man I had grown to enjoy. I pushed left on the left big smelly button. Mario himself dashed to the left. Big smelly dust between his big smelly silly brown shoes filled the big smelly air. Amazed by his big smelly speed, I quickly pushed right to test his big smelly turning abilities. I was not disappointed, as Mario changed direction in a matter of big smelly seconds. I learned the other big smelly button functions as I played. Big smelly button function B allowed Mario to dash at high big smelly speeds similar to my own. A allowed him to leap so high in the big smelly sky that I screamed in big smelly fear that perhaps maybe he wouldn't come back down. Yet he always did, which engaged me in the big smelly game world even further. I quickly grasped the big smelly concepts of jumping large big smelly gaps, avoiding big smelly enemies, and climbing a big smelly flagpole at the end of each big smelly level. I got to the big smelly 4th level without much big smelly problems. I looked into a nearby big smelly mirror and smiled at my big smelly self with one big smelly eyebrow raised, and I said loudly, "Does this big smelly game think I am not good? I can handle any big smelly thing it throws my way." Suddenly, big smelly, the screen turned black. And I don't just mean black. I mean so black. The screen looked like a big smelly deep hole. I said out loud, "Is this a big smelly hole I see before me?" And it echoed like a hole.
My echo must be
I wiped a large chunk of big smelly sweat from my flopping brow.